President Biden has called upon Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, to cease the war against Hamas for 3 days, to pause. That's a ceasefire, in my view, not a pause. But here's something else. Earlier today, there was an effort in the Senate to advance the funding, the aid package for Israel. Well, that was blocked by Senate Democrats. At the same time, the Senate Democrats want to continue to give money to Hamas, humanitarian aid, and they're still funding the United Nations and UNRWA, which is a very corrupt organization that we've talked about before. And as I stated at the top of the program, a new report out today tracks where members of this UN agency for Palestinian aid celebrated the attack, the massacre on Israeli civilians on October the 7th. Well, there are some in the Senate that were already at work trying to defund Hamas. Joining me now is one of them, Senator Pete Ricketts from Nebraska. He serves on 3 Senate committees, including the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Ricketts, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on.
So first, your reaction to the Senate Democrats delaying aid to Israel.
Well, this is just, sadly, another example of Democrats playing games with a very important topic. The package that the House passed was substantially what the president asked for with regard to aid to Israel. And I know it's a crazy idea. They actually wanted to pay for it by taking money out of the IRS. And so they're actually doing the fiscally responsible thing. And yet the Senate Democrats blocked it because they didn't like it. They want their package. They're playing political games. This is a war. People are dying. Hamas committed unspeakable acts of terror, atrocities, barbarism, and yet the Senate Democrats are blocking giving aid to Israel. It's just what's wrong in Washington, D.C.
Now, Senator, end of last month, you introduced legislation, Stop Support for Hamas Act, which would, in one aspect of it, was the money going through the United Nations. Since President Biden became president, $1 billion has gone to UNRWA. And that is an organization that has given money to Hamas. And there's a report out today that members of the team, the staff of UNRWA, actually celebrated publicly on October the 7th when Hamas massacred innocent Israeli civilians.
Yeah, frankly, this doesn't surprise me. UNRWA is a corrupt organization. In fact, the Trump administration said it was corrupt beyond repair, and that's why they said no more money for UNRWA. And so they cut that funding, which, as you just pointed out, Joe Biden then restored. The reason that that funding was cut originally was because UNRWA was housing Hamas people in their buildings. They had facilities where they had people or weapons rather they were storing for Hamas. They hired Hamas agents. They had textbooks that glorified terrorism. And that's why the Trump administration knew they should just cut this thing off. It's terrible. I've introduced with Senator Tim Scott my Stop Support Hamas Act, which would do the same thing. This Stop Support for Hamas Act would cut the funding to UNRWA because they cannot be trusted. They are basically a tool of the Hamas terrorist organization. That's been said before, not by me. And it wouldn't just stop there, though. It would also freeze the economic support funds going to Gaza and the West Bank until Israel has verifiably dismantled the terrorist infrastructure of Hamas and other terrorist groups. It would also strengthen certification requirements for the Palestinian Authority. Because there's one of the terrorists was found with a check from the Palestinian Authority in his pocket. We got to strengthen and crack down on that. It would also make sure any U.S. assistance to non-governmental organizations in the West Bank or Gaza are not hiring Hamas or other terrorist agents, not benefiting Hamas. And then finally, it would strengthen the Taylor Force Act, which goes after the pay-to-slave program that Hamas has for people who go attack Israel. If you get captured or killed, they pay your family. And that's just a horrible program that we got to stop as well. So there's a lot we can do to cut off the funding for this, and this is a way to do it.
This is U.S. funds. This makes absolutely no sense. We're funding the very thing we're supposed to be fighting against. And I think, Senator, it's important for people to know that Hamas is not just, some kind of rogue group out there. That's the government of Gaza.
Yes.
They are in
Hamas
power.
Was elected in 2007 and never gave power back.
Right.
They control Hamas, control Gaza. And here's the other thing, right? It's not just Hamas. Iran is funding Hamas. And the Biden administration has also released the sanctions on the oil money going to Iran that's given them billions of dollars. Under the Trump administration, Hamas was almost bankrupt. And now we've just given Iran, a nation who we know is dedicated to destroying Israel, and us, by the way, to a bunch of money so they can fund these terrorist organizations.
So let me ask you this question, Senator Ricketts. How can the United States government give money to the people in Gaza and not go through the government of Gaza and this humanitarian aid? How does it get to the people and it's not going through the hands of Hamas, since Hamas is the government?
Right. So what they'll say is that they're giving it to the UN through UNRWA, and that UNRWA is managing this.
But you just pointed out
it's not true.
You just pointed out what UNRWA is doing with the money that they get from the United States as well.
Yeah. So it's just not true. What it really boils down to is the Biden administration is just turning a blind eye to giving terrorists like Hamas our taxpayer dollars, and they don't want to take the steps necessary to be able to block it. They are utterly responsible for how Hamas gets funded through these different organizations. They are the ones that re-implemented the policy to give money to Hamas. No matter how much money you give Hamas, Hamas will always want to destroy the state of Israel. They're a terrorist organization. This is what they do. We must treat them that way, and this administration will not do that. They have a policy of appeasement, whether it's Hamas or Iran. They just don't get it.
Senator, final statement here. We're up against a break, but I would assume that this has bipartisan support to stop the funding of Hamas. I mean, right? I mean, it only makes sense.
You would think. However, we haven't got any of my Democrat colleagues to get on it yet, though I am hopeful that some will come on board with this as we just introduced this bill. But, you look at how Patty Murray just, for the Democrats, blocked the implementation of the Israel aid package on the floor of the Senate. It's just disappointing to see Democrats play politics with this very important subject.
Well, keep fighting, Senator. Always great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you.